Welcome to the EPRS Chronicles. This is the first episode in our two-part series on financing Ukraine's recovery. In this episode, we will look at why financing Ukraine's recovery matters and what the EU in particular is contributing towards it. For this, I'm joined by EPRS expert on Ukraine's recovery, Tim Peters. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Kelly.
So first things first, can you tell us why the EU wants to finance Ukraine's recovery, reconstruction, and modernization in general?
Yes, I would make 3 points. First of all, it's just the right thing to do. We, as democracies in the world, should stand together against bullies, and particularly, of course, when the other democracy is our neighbor, like Ukraine. Secondly, it's in our interest as the European Union to support Ukraine against Russia, because if Russia wins against Ukraine, they might also look at other parts of the EU which they can attack next, and we don't really want that. And thirdly, it's also in both of our interests, Ukraine and ours, to help make Ukraine a vibrant democracy and a successful market economy. So they are in our neighborhood, we can profit from that. Both they can become a member of the internal market, later they can become a member of the EU, and they can become a beacon of freedom and democracy in that region.
Can you tell us how much will financing Ukraine's recovery cost overall?
That's a very good question, and it would be a bit premature to put now a final number on that, while at every day, every hour, Russia is destroying more infrastructure of Ukraine. There are different numbers out there. There was a widely received study of the World Bank, which said it would cost $411 billion to rebuild Ukraine. There's another number put out by the Ukrainian government, which says that it would cost $700 billion to rebuild Ukraine. But I would all take it with a grain of salt as long as the war is still ongoing.
And even though it's approximate, do we have any idea how much of this amount will come from the European Union?
Maybe let me say, so far the EU has already committed very large amounts. The European Parliament has just now adopted another proposal which would give another 50 billion euros to Ukraine from 2024 until 2027. And since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the Team Europe, consisting of the EU and its member states, has already committed a sum of around 86 billion euros for Ukraine, for financial, humanitarian, military support, but also help for the refugees who have fled to the EU. These are large sums, but the good news is that the public sector will not have to finance everything. Once the war stops, it will mainly be the private sector that will finance the recovery.
And how does Team Europe spending compare to that of our allies and our international donors?
If you compare all the spending in terms of financial, humanitarian, military aid and help for refugees, and also now the latest package that we have adopted, we come to a sum of 135 billion euros, and that is unmatched. So we are really the largest donor to Ukraine. Behind us is the US. They're of course particularly good on military aid, and then a lot further behind are the UK, Canada, the World Bank, Japan, other Western democracies. But so I think really the help of the EU for Ukraine is highly relevant.
Thank you, Tim, for clarifying why and how much is being spent so far on financing Ukraine's recovery. However, some people might not understand why so much is being spent on Ukraine's recovery now when the war is still ongoing. Can you tell us a little more about what the logic behind that is?
Yes, first of all, as long as the war is ongoing, a lot of the money is also just going on daily spending of the Ukrainian government that is supported by the EU. So only a smaller part is going into the recovery. Secondly, of course, the recovery has already started, and that's a good idea because the people who live in Ukraine, they need energy infrastructure, because that's something that Russia really likes to destroy. They need houses, they need schools, and they have to function. So those, it's obvious that we have to already start rebuilding those. And thirdly, in the large parts of Ukraine, particularly in the west, there is no war. So the reconstruction is already taking place. And as the more successful it is in those parts, the easier it is to roll it out over the whole country once Ukraine has won the war.
So what does this mean in terms of how spending will change once the war is over?
I think once the war is over, we can do a real damage assessment on the ground in the whole country, and then we know exactly what Ukraine needs and how much. And based on that, also the reconstruction can start in the whole country. Another point is that then we don't have to support the war efforts anymore, so our support can really focus on the reconstruction. And fourthly, also the private investment will really start to flow in. Once the war is over, this will really be a major factor.
Well, this sounds like the best case scenario. Can you tell me what a prolonged conflict would mean for financing Ukraine's reconstruction and recovery?
Yes, the longer the war lasts, the more expensive it will be for all international donors, including the EU. Therefore, it should be in our interest to help Ukraine as much as we can with what they need to win the war fast, to give them the mine-clearing equipment, long-range weapons, drones, tanks that they actually need to win the war fast.
Thank you, Tim.
It was a pleasure, Kelly.
This concludes our episode on why the EU is financing Ukraine's recovery. In episode 2, we will look at what the EU is doing to help ensure Ukraine's recovery is a success.